plans to keep about 120,000 U.S. soldiers in Iraq through 2007. How long will this go on? How much will it cost in blood and treasure? Is it worth it? Joining me now are Ivan Eland, a senior fellow with the Independent Institute, author of The Empire Has No Clothes, and Jack Spencer, senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Jack Spencer, let me start with you. $300 billion, that's Afghanistan and Iraq. You've got 1,400 almost dead, 10,000 wounded, tens of thousands of Iraqis. How long is this going to go on, and how much should the American people pay for a democratic Iraq?
Well, we don't know how long it's going to go on, but we need to continue moving forward until we accomplish our mission, which is that the Iraqis in Iraq are able to provide for their own security, to take care of themselves. And it's time for us to begin pulling back, putting that responsibility in their laps. And the way to get to that point is for them to have successful elections, and I think that's going to be a turning point for us to begin pulling back. And what you see already in the rhetoric is from our concentration going from providing that security to really putting all of our effort into that training. And it's that training, hopefully combined with a successful election, which will give the Iraqis, make Iraqi stakeholders in that government, that will lead to success in Iraq.
All right, you say stakeholders. Why should the Sunnis, who are the heart of the resistance, kill other Sunnis to support a Shia-dominated government?
Well, they shouldn't kill other Sunnis to support
that's what you're going to get.
Well, no, that may be part of the process, Pat. And in past, democracies have been born out of blood, and this one may be no different than many others that are very successful today. But what the Sunnis are going to have to learn is that to be successful in the new Iraq, they need to participate. And one of the reasons they're not participating is because they're being fed bad information from the terrorists, from the Saddam loyalists, from these other sects. And what they're going to see is that the elections are going to go forward, Iraq's going to begin moving forward, and if the Sunnis want any say at all, they're going to have to participate.
The train's leaving the station. Okay, let me go to Ivan Eland. Ivan, look, if the United States should pull out, as you've suggested, would that not, and the country collapses in chaos and civil war, and it becomes a haven for terrorists, would that not be the kind of debacle and disaster this country simply cannot afford in the Middle East?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. The country's already in chaos, and when Jack says we're moving forward, I'm not sure U.S. forces are moving things forward. We've got chaos already. This election is probably going to increase the chaos because the Sunnis are not going to get many representatives because they're either boycotting the election or their representatives or their voters are too scared to go to the polls. So they're probably going to be disenfranchised even more. And frankly, just because the United States withdraws and does not necessarily mean that the country is going to go into chaos. I think we ought to give up on this idea of training a national army and provide local security on the part of the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds.
Well, let me ask you this, Ivan Eland. Look, if the United States ceases doing battle with the insurgents, who have been successful basically in fighting a guerrilla war, fighting to a stalemate, it seems to me they're going to dominate in the Sunni triangle. And you've got a situation then where you've got a haven for terrorists and for guerrillas, which is far larger than what we cleaned up in Afghanistan. In other words, haven't you left there with a worse problem than you started with if you follow your advice and pull out?
Not necessarily, because I think that assumes that the Sunnis are naturally terrorists, and I think what the Sunnis are fighting for, number one, is to get the foreign invader out. The administration calls them terrorists, Baathists, and criminals, and there are some of those, each of those in there, but I think most of them are Iraqi nationalists fighting to get the foreign superpower out. The second reason that the Sunnis are fighting is to avoid paybacks from a Shiite government. Remember, the Sunnis ruled Iraq with an iron hand, and they're scared of payback. So if you create a situation where they rule their own territory, the other groups rule their own territory, there's no incentive to take over the central government to oppress the other groups because the central government is weak.
All right, let me talk, Jack. Look, the cause of the insurgency, it's in the Sunni area. It seems to me, and why it keeps expanding and growing, it quite frankly is the Americans are here, they're occupying us, they're running the show, it's their elections, it's not ours. And so they're fighting against the United States. Isn't the way to end the insurgency, frankly, to remove its cause if the cause is the armed forces of the United States?
I think there's some truth in that, Pat. I think that when we first invaded Iraq, the decision was made to stay there and to try to help them move towards democracy. And once that decision was made, as opposed to pulling back right away, removing Saddam and giving the Iraqis this opportunity to move forward themselves. But we didn't make that decision. But now we're there. We need to continue to move forward. I think it is time to pull back, and that has two consequences. One is that you begin to ensure that the Iraqis, both Sunnis, all Iraqis, begin taking responsibility for that security, because we're not going to be there to do it. And secondly, you begin to achieve that dynamic that you just described, where that the United States is not on every street corner. But that doesn't mean we leave Iraq altogether.
Okay, well, let's take a look at a recent Washington poll. It found the majority of Americans don't think the war in Iraq was worth fighting for. When asked, quote, considering the cost to the United States versus the benefits to the United States, do you think the war with Iraq was worth fighting for? 44% said yes and 55% no. Ivan Eland, how long do you think the American people will sustain this effort in Iraq?
Well, I think probably not all that long. We don't have a draft like Vietnam, which is really pushing the middle class and the rest of the political voters to push immediately for withdrawal. But I think the war has been lost. It may take a while, but we've lost public opinion in Iraq. The Iraqis no longer want us there. The people here at home don't want us there. And in a guerrilla warfare, public opinion is everything. Our military is doing a sterling job at doing what they do best, and that was going to Baghdad. But they've never been able to fight a guerrilla warfare very well. And so I think that's the problem.
All right, Jack Spencer, it's clear, look, the home front is not as solid as it was a year ago. There's no doubt about it. There's impatience with this. The cost of it's enormous. The deficits are going up. People are sick of reading about the bloodshed and things like that. If the country followed Ivan Eland's advice, or if the Shias took over and said, you got to get out, what do you think would happen to Iraq?
Well, if that happened, if the Shias got together and said to get out, then we'll get out. But I think that that's not the right thing to do. I don't know what would happen. I think what we can know is that if we stay in Iraq, we continue helping the Shia and all of the Iraqis to provide for their own security.
If our presence is the cause
You're saying the presence is the cause. I don't think that the presence is necessarily the cause.
What do you think the insurgents are fighting for then?
I think the insurgents are fighting to prevent democracy from taking root in Iraq, because a lot of people have a lot to lose.
Why? They don't want democracy because the Shias are going to run the show. That's the point of my question. Why should Sunnis fight and die for a Shia-dominated government?
Because Sunnis can participate in a Shia-dominated government, just like Democrats can participate in a Republican-dominated government.
Look, the point is they're outnumbered almost 3-to-1 by the Shia.
But that's okay. You can still have, Pat, you can still have a peaceful government where all sides are represented. It happens all over the world. You're assuming that if all sides aren't equally represented, it's going to result in violence, and that doesn't necessarily happen.
It is a violent society. Ivan Eland, go ahead.
Well, I think unified democracy in Iraq is a pipe dream, and I don't even think the Bush administration really believes that they're going to have that. The only hope is to have a confederation, a loose confederation of these three areas, or some sort of partition. And the reason I say that is because they are going to fight over the central government. The Sunnis do not want to be the victim of paybacks from the Shiites for all the violence that the Sunnis perpetrated on the other two groups when they were in power. And so I think most experts on federalism say that when you have multiple ethnic groups and you pop the top off an authoritarian regime, the country will break up. Whether it's peaceable like Czechoslovakia or violently like Yugoslavia, I think we're headed down the violent route here.
Okay, I'm sorry we don't have any more time. Ivan Eland, Jack Spencer, thanks. We'll be right back.